this session, which will be posted on our website after we conclude our event. So we definitely invite you all to visit our website at psychology.nova.edu for this information. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome all of you to this Shark Chat on this Tuesday, October 12th, wonderful day. My name is Anthony Noriega, and I serve as the Associate Director for the Department of Recruitment and Admissions for the College of Psychology here at Nova Southeastern University. And it is, again, an honor to be with you this evening, but also to be in the presence of some great panelists. I must admit, it is a privilege to be here. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Denise Horlin. Ms. Horlin?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Noriega. I am City of Plantation Council President Denise Horlin, and I am thrilled on behalf of the City of Plantation to introduce our second parenting webinar in partnership with Nova Southeastern University. Tonight, we are featuring Dr. Shannon Wharton, who will be presenting We Can Do Hard Things, Part 1, Managing Difficult Feelings. Dr. Wharton is a licensed psychologist and assistant director of the school-related psychological assessments and clinical interventions clinic housed with NSU's Psychology Services Department. Dr. Wharton's professional interests include training and education, promoting self-care, suicide prevention, sexual orientation, and gender diversity and psychological assessment. Please be sure to sign up for the next webinar with Dr. Wharton on Tuesday, November 9th, which is We Can Do Hard Things, Part 2, Conversations with Kids. And now I'm absolutely honored to turn it over to Dr. Shannon Wharton.
Thank you all so much. So we are going to talk with you today about managing difficult feelings in little ones. Our target audience is really elementary school years, but I think what we're going to be talking about can relate to kids across the age range. But before we jump into it, my two co-presenters, Blanca and Andy, are going to introduce themselves. So Blanca, I'll pass it to you first.
Hi everyone, my name is Blanca. I am a third-year student in the School Psychology PsyD program. And that's pretty much all I am right now, but I'm super excited to be here and to be going over my stuff with you guys, and I'm so happy you all are here.
So hi everyone, my name is Andrew Stupas, or Andy, you can call me as well. I am also a school psych doctoral student at Nova Southeastern University. I spent about 10 years as a classroom teacher in Palm Beach County. So yeah, I'm excited to talk this evening with you about what Dr. Wharton mentioned.
And Anthony, I believe you had a few words also before we jumped in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Wharton. Again, to all our attendees, we cannot thank you enough for being with us this evening. Again, please be sure to visit us at psychology.nova.edu for all information that is happening within our college, like this wonderful presentation you're about to hear, amongst others that are coming up. And with that, Dr. Wharton, I'll send it on back to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to screen share. Blanca is going to get us started. She'll pass it over to Andy after her portion, and then after Andy speaks, I will jump in towards the middle end of the presentation. So let me get this screen share. Okay. Blanca, you can see it? Okay, go for it.
Awesome. So as we all told you, we're going to do the first webinar for We Can Do Hard Things, Managing Difficult Feelings. So pretty much we're going to start with an introduction. And before we start going over the activities and the resources for emotional regulation, we need to start really at the basics. This means we need to understand big feelings and their role in the process. And some of this may seem very, very basic information, but it's important for the building blocks. So one quote that the team and I really loved was this one: "There are no bad kids, just impressionable, conflicted young people wrestling with emotions and impulses, trying to communicate their feelings and needs the only way they know how." And we believe that this quote holds so much power and truth in how children are trying to manage the world and live their lives with these really big feelings in these really small bodies. And that leads us to note that sometimes a child's feelings are so much bigger than what they can even comprehend that they can't even begin to express what's happening inside them. And when children aren't taught how to deal with big feelings, the way that and how to communicate with them, it may seem inappropriate and not really effective when they do. But that does not make them a bad child. And that's a big thing to take home, that just because your child may be struggling with this and maybe having behaviors does not mean they're a bad child or you're a bad parent. So now, before we go on and we talk about emotional regulations, we really need to understand big feelings because they go hand in hand. So if you guys like, in the chat, you can type a few things that come to mind when you think big feelings. The first thing that pops in your head. There's no right or wrong answers. So I'll give it a few seconds before we move on. I see fear, anger, frustration, rage, yelling. Yeah. Life struggle, shame. Yeah, and I'll give it like 5 more seconds. Crying, sadness, grief. Yeah, you guys named a lot. Conflicted, and all of those are correct because all feelings are big feelings. And we can move. Yeah, sometimes the slides are slower than like me going a million miles per hour. Being told no can make big feelings. Yeah. And big feelings can also be like more positive feelings. We're going to talk about labeling feelings in a second, like excitement, being like super happy, and maybe your child's screaming because they don't know how to express that and things like that. But at the end of the day, all feelings are big feelings, and they fall on a spectrum or a wheel. They range across the board and they go deeper than they seem. Sometimes we may think that a child's angry for no reason, but maybe they're feeling actually threatened and frustrated. And that's why it's so important to understand how big all these feelings actually are, because majority of the time, they're not clear-cut, and children are learning new feelings every day, which can then relate to them having these issues expressing it. One thing that should be mentioned is labeling feelings, specifically bad feelings. There is no such thing as bad feelings. Majority of us have been taught that there are good, there are bad. Disgust, anger, fear, sadness may be labeled as negative, but it's really important not to label these feelings with your children because they can produce feelings of guilt, shame, and avoidance when they come up. And they will come up, it's inevitable. This can later result in not learning the coping strategies needed to accept and move on from these feelings, and can increase rumination or even worse effects, which we'll mention a little bit later. And honestly, everyone has big feelings. It doesn't matter your age, your background, gender, the money you make, or anything else. Everyone will feel these emotions time by time, and that's normal. And it's also normal for people not to know what these feelings are and not to know how to express them. And that leads us to the next slide and the next point. When we don't know how to express our feelings, we may have a meltdown. I'm going to say meltdown in quotations because it's not my prayer word. And then Dr. Shannon, I don't know if it changed on your screen, but there we go. It's just a little lagged for me. Sorry guys, it's my internet. And this whole concept of not knowing how to express our feelings resulting in a meltdown can happen for both children and adults. So once again, in the chat real quickly, when you guys think of meltdowns in children, what do you guys think of? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah, I see tantrums, yelling, screaming, crying. You guys are quick with this one. Uncontrollable crying. Yeah, you guys are right. That's something that you see a lot. Holding his or her breath. Yes. And now to flip it, when you guys think of meltdowns in adults, what do you think of? Yeah, pretty much the same. Shutting down, yelling, depression, anger, tears, panic attacks. Yeah, isolation. Yeah, silence, aggressive behavior. Those are all really great. And like I said, you guys have mentioned all the right answers because there's no correct answer, because all of these feelings and these meltdowns, they vary. In a kindergartner, a meltdown may be themselves throwing themselves on the floor, screaming, but a 5th grader may slam their door, talk back, raise their voice. In adults, it may be irritability, getting annoyed at small things that usually don't bother you, picking fights, being passive aggressive, or shutting down, as some of you mentioned. And it's normal for adults like children to struggle with expressing their own feelings and emotions. And that moves us into the fact that all feelings are valid and they matter. And sometimes people feel guilty for feelings, but it's really important to dive in. Before we can even talk emotional regulation, it's important to hit this point one more time. All feelings serve a purpose, are valid, and matter. We previously said that feelings go deeper than they appear. There's no such thing as bad feelings. And when we don't know how to express them, they can turn into meltdowns. And the thing with meltdowns is that they usually serve a deeper meaning or purpose that a lot of times people are not able to realize in their children or in themselves. For example, let's say you have a fourth grader, and some of you might actually have a fourth grader, and they get really angry and they start raising their voice and they turn around and say, "I hate you," before they run to the room and slam their door. Your first thought might be, "I know this child's not slamming doors in my house," which can be addressed later. But what do you think your child's really feeling in that moment? Do they really hate you? Probably not. They might be feeling unheard or overwhelmed, and they might be at a point where they don't even know what they're feeling. It's just so much that all they feel like they can do is yell. Another example is a toddler crying and screaming after you didn't know what snack they were pointing to. Are they really upset because you're picking the wrong snacks? Probably not. More than likely, they're frustrated because they can't communicate as well as they would like, or as much as they are trying to, or in their little heads, they think they're saying it. And now think about you. If you're in a fight with your partner or your friend and you start raising your voice, or you start isolating yourself, are you feeling unheard or misunderstood, maybe defeated, frustrated? It's really important to recognize that majority of the time, feelings are serving a bigger purpose and they're not surface level. They do go deeper. And we keep mentioning that because as you start this process with your children and emotional regulation, you use these skills and these practices, you're going to realize that a lot of these deeper feelings are going to come up, or you may be the ones who have to teach your child what they're actually feeling. And we're going to point this a little bit more with Andy with emotional intelligence. But now let's talk about what emotional regulation is. Emotional regulation is the ability to recognize and express the emotions we have. This process involves becoming aware of your emotions, identifying and directing those emotions, the ability to adapt, and effectively using and expressing them. These skills can increase or decrease the intensity and duration of certain emotions. And these skills play a really important role in the development of social skills, preventing behavioral problems, increasing peer relationships, and increasing academic achievement among children. Unfortunately, emotional regulation skills are not innate. We're not born with them, but we have the ability to be taught. And we can be taught in multiple ways, and honestly, at any age. It's easier when you're a little bit little, but when you're older, you can also be taught. In total, this may all sound amazing for you, but the bigger point is that there are some negative effects that can happen when children or adults, majority children, have difficulties in emotional regulation skills. So children with underdeveloped emotional regulation skills experience problems in socialization, they experience academic failures, behavioral problems in school and in other environments. Emotional regulation is also one part that is found to play a role in the development and maintenance of anxiety disorder in children. So the lower the emotional regulation, the higher the chance of a child developing an anxiety disorder. And research has shown as children grow up and they hit those milestones and they become adolescents and then they become adults, if they have difficulties in emotional regulation, that plays a role in the chance of them developing a depression disorder. Obviously, since you're all here in this presentation, you want to decrease all of these chances and be proactive. However, it can be hard. And the tough truth is, it's hard to teach these skills when you yourself may be struggling with it. And we're going to make this really quickly about you guys, the parents, because you can't pour from an empty glass. Sometimes it may feel uncomfortable when your child's having big feelings, and that's okay. You may have a hard time when your child is crying or having a meltdown. That's okay. And you may have difficulty showing empathy towards your child, and that's okay. You may actually be feeling this because when you were little, you were told not to cry. You were told, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, or you were taught to toughen up. These are just a few examples that may have an effect and may make it difficult for you to recognize and regulate your own big feelings. And that's okay. I'm sure most of you are here to break that cycle. And it's not too late for you to learn emotional recognition and regulation skills, or even strengthen the ones you have. It's very common and normal for adults to have these difficulties, and therefore it's important to have self-compassion in difficult times when confronting this and starting this with your children. Impossible difficulties in emotional regulation, which may also come up during this, does not make you a bad parent at all. It's not too late to learn how to feel comfortable, how to have a game plan when your child has big feelings or meltdowns, and how to show empathy. And the great news is that you are the perfect person to teach your child these skills. You can do it through modeling and working through the motions with them, such as doing emotional regulation techniques with your child when they're having big feelings, teaching them beforehand, or even you yourself doing it for yourself when it's happening among you and with inside of you. And you may ask, why me? And it's because the research actually shows that direct family members and caregivers have a large influence on emotional regulation skills in children. So where do you fall into all of this? As I just said, emotional regulation growth in children and parent or caregivers' attitudes towards their own skills go hand in hand. So whenever you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, you can do tasks to alleviate these feelings. These might involve self-care, self-compassion, mindfulness, sensory grounding techniques, and more. A big point is that anything in this PowerPoint geared towards fostering emotional regulation skills in your children can be taken and changed to fit your own needs, because your emotional well-being is just as important. Since you'll be the ones modeling this for your children and helping them get through it, it is important that you make sure that you yourself are okay. It should be noted, and I want to also say that emotional regulation should be used as a preventative matter. So it should be taught before, but it can be very useful in the moment, and you may have to jump in and teach those skills or remind your child in the moment. And you have to make sure you're okay to do that, because if not, it can become a big whirlwind. And once again, this is a learning process for everyone, but you guys can do it. You're here and that's amazing. And remember, you can't pour from an empty glass. So everything you learn here today for your children, you can take it for yourself. And now that we've gone over the basics of big feelings and the basics of emotional regulation, let's dive in deeper and talk about emotional intelligence with Andy.
Yes, thank you so much. So much of what I'll discuss this evening is building on what Blanca just talked about the idea that emotional regulation is so important for children and adults alike, because it helps us to manage our feelings and to manage our actions once we have those feelings. So emotional intelligence, and it's also called emotional literacy in some places that you'll see it written about or spoken about. Really what it deals with is being able to understand your own emotions, so your inner self, and then sort of externally being able to understand other people's emotions. And once you have that understanding, being able to make the correct kinds of decisions with the way that you respond to those emotions, whether they're your own emotions or someone else's emotions. So I like what everyone was writing in the chat, because you saw a mix of externalizing behaviors like aggressive behaviors and internalizing behaviors like anxiety and depression. And those behaviors, whether external or internal, really are born from at least partially from an inability to respond to those feelings in an appropriate way. So Emotional intelligence, when a child learns to develop these skills, they are less likely to develop some of those problems that Blanca talked about, like anxiety and depression, because they have a better understanding of their emotions and can respond to them more appropriately. So emotional intelligence is comprised of these 5 main factors. So self-awareness, and just like what it sounds, you recognize how your emotions affect your physical self. So this is very much focused on the physical self. I'm sure everyone out there tonight has experienced a time where you've noticed that, maybe your shoulders are sort of starting to tense up and your neck is getting tight. Maybe you're starting to get a headache, and you recognize those things as maybe just physical symptoms, but there can be that psychological component to it. And children, like Blanca said, we're not born recognizing that the feelings that I have, everything psychological is biological, right? So those feelings that I have within myself can affect my physical state as well. So being self-aware means noticing how your body is feeling in the moment in relation to some sort of external environmental factor. And when we feel that way, when we get tight in our shoulders, when we start to get those headaches and there's maybe caused by stress, we get kind of snippy with each other, we tend to. And this is very common for children as well. Maybe I'm overtired and I get to school and I really don't want to do anything. So I kind of yell at someone in the classroom, or I refuse to do my work or something like that. And then that causes a big kind of downward spiral from there. But a child who is able to recognize that and how their actions impact other people is better able to maintain more adaptive behaviors. And that's the self-regulation. So we want to be able to direct ourselves in appropriate ways. So understanding that when I start to feel this way, stressed and anxious and nervous, and maybe I have that physical cue, then these are the things that I can do to calm myself down before it gets to a point where I start to exhibit those externalizing behaviors. This is especially important for children who have those aggressive behaviors, because those are really obvious to adults, especially in a school setting or at home. And that's when kids get really singled out. And again, like Blanca said, when they are exhibiting those externalizing behaviors, it's not because they're bad children, it's just because they aren't quite sure how to express themselves in a more adaptive or a more appropriate way. And teaching the self-regulation skills can improve that. The next factor would be social skills. And that, again, really all of these things are connected with each other. When you have self-regulation and you have appropriate social skills, you can maintain healthy relationships with other people. And that's really an integral part of maintaining positive mental health. So there's a lot of research about how relationships with other people is what really keeps us happy and keeps us feeling self-actuated. And when children are unable to be aware of their feelings and regulate their actions based on those feelings, and they're more likely to be either rejected by their peers, rejected by teachers. They might feel like my parents are angry at me all the time. I just don't know what else to do. So if we can improve those things, then that improves the social skills, it improves the overall well-being of the child. The next factor is empathy. And we all know empathy kind of helps us understand what others are feeling, helps us to connect ourselves to them. And that's another factor that really kids, well, no one, I keep saying kids, but this is true for everyone. No one is born understanding empathy and what it is exactly and how to employ it in our own lives. Where do we learn that? Well, we learn that, like Blanca said, from our loved ones, from the adults who take care of us, from older siblings, older cousins, people like that. We see it, and then we understand how it makes us feel, and we're able to use it ourselves. And finally, motivation. Emotional intelligence, when we are better able to understand our emotions and we have those social skills taken care of, we have that empathy, we also have to take care of our intrinsic motivation. So that kind of drive that keeps us moving toward our goals and helps us to maintain interest in different situations. So again, this is very very important or very salient for school-based settings, because that's a really common place for kids to have trouble with their emotional regulation, and for those issues to become maybe blown out of proportion to a degree, because again, I'm not being bad, I'm not sure how else to express this, and then now I have all these adults who are angry at me, and maybe my motivation starts to kind of wane a little bit because, well, I don't feel safe here anymore, and so teaching all of these factors, whether one at a time or in tandem with each other, is really important to help a child be as well balanced and as well rounded as possible, and to keep them to help them to maintain a positive mental health. So if we go on to the next slide, I have a video here from the Gottman Institute that speaks about emotional intelligence from a school-based perspective, but there's some really good tidbits in there about emotional intelligence and what it is and how it can help you as a parent. Looks like the audio might not be working. I don't know if you can.
Dr. Warning, you might have to unmute yourself.
Let's see if this works. Can you hear it?
I think it has to be shared with audio, but we can also skip it and just look at it another time. But the Gottman Institute is really good. There's some good resources there for parents, especially around emotion coaching. So that's a place to check out, and we can mention that later before we go. So how do you teach emotional regulation as a parent? What do you do, or not emotional regulation, but emotional intelligence, which really it goes hand in hand with emotional regulation. But what can you do as a parent to help your child understand this really kind of abstract concept? It's not something like a math problem where you can sit down and show them how to do it. It's a long, kind of never-ending process, because I wouldn't say that I have perfect emotional intelligence myself, and I'm sure not many of us would, because it's something that you just really have to work on throughout your entire life. And there might be areas where you always kind of struggle with, but that's okay, like Blanca said. So what can you do as a parent, though, when they're young, when they're their brains are little sponges and they can soak up as much as possible? So the first thing you can really do is model empathy and connect. You are the best teacher for your child. Everything you do, they are soaking it up, and they are making sense of the world around them based on what they see you doing. So this is especially an important place where we can't say, well, do as I do, but not as I, or do as I say, but not as I do, rather. You have to reflect that compassionate, loving kindness that you would like to see in your child. Not only to other people, but also to yourself. So that's where that empathy component is when your child sees you being understanding of others and meeting them where they are, then your child is going to take that to heart and practice those things as well. Okay, I see mom is being really patient with this person today, and maybe patience is something that I should try too. And I see dad, and he is, being very calm, even though I can tell that he's angry. So maybe when people are angry, they can be calm too, until they're not so angry anymore. And that's what you want to do for your child, is you want to reflect the things that you would like to see from them. And as Blanca mentioned previously, when your child is having those big emotions, whether they're negative and even sometimes positive, they can be, too big for the moment. But when they're having those big emotions, and this is especially true for negative emotions, don't diminish those emotions. Don't say, excuse me, I don't want to say don't. That's a time when you can connect with them over that emotion. So rather than telling them, be quiet, at an extreme, I'll give you something to cry about. So we've definitely heard that. But rather than do that, talk to them about what's going on. How are you feeling right now? I can tell that you're feeling really upset about this. What do you feel in your body? Do you feel that tightness in your shoulder? What does it feel like in your arms? What does it feel like in your head? And help them to connect their emotion with that physical sensation. That's going to build what we talked about, that self-awareness. And just like you're the best teacher, you're also the best partner for them to practice with. Have those conversations so that they can practice the language of emotions. Emotion words like angry, sad, happy, confused, frustrated. There's a big difference between angry and frustrated, but children don't necessarily understand that. And again, even some adults don't. So practicing that language is so important, and you're the best person to do it with because it's so low stakes. If they're doing it with a peer, they might be worried about judgment, but with mom or dad or whomever, they feel more comfortable, or at least they will the more you do it with them. And avoid punishment or judgment when those emotions seem disruptive. And Blanca already mentioned this, but I want to mention it again. When we get the sense that we're being judged for doing something, we tend to stop doing it. So if I'm having a meltdown and that's the only way that I know how to express myself in the moment, then I'm just going to internalize that as I'm not allowed to have that feeling. Rather than I'm not allowed to express that feeling in this way, I'm going to say big emotions are something we don't do. So I'm going to bottle it up. And we all know that that's not good. So the next kind of component that you want to think about is how you can be an emotion coach for your child. So we talked about the emotion vocabulary, and talking to them about their big feelings. Excuse me. So you might say things like, it seems like you're feeling angry right now. Is it because your sister took your toy away? Or is it because you got in a fight with your friends? Helping them to connect a feeling not only to the physical sensation, but also the event that created that feeling is also going to help them build a vocabulary. Oh, I feel angry because this happened. And then you move on to how can we address that feeling? Do we need to talk to your friend and apologize or tell them how you were feeling? These are things that you can coach into so that they can then generalize those actions and those abilities to other places. The goal is to get them to be independently noticing their feelings and addressing those feelings in a positive way. And it's not only for negative emotions, right? You can say something like, wow, you sound so excited about how well you did on that test. I'm so proud of you. Or what does it feel like inside your body when you're excited? Help them notice those physical sensations, help them connect those feelings to an event. You can also play games to practice labeling emotions. So just really basic. So you can have them cut out pictures of faces in magazines that match certain emotions. So you can pull a word, an emotion word out of a jar. Okay, you got angry. Find all the faces that look angry and let's make an emotion collage. And that helps them, again, get a sense of how other people look when they're feeling that way. So we're practicing emotion. Feeling face charades. So same thing, you can pull a feeling out of a jar and we can act those emotions out. So, and encourage them to really get into it. So facial features and expressions, and what does your body look like when you're angry? Do you get big and tough, or are you small and kind of tight, right? So they feel it in their body, and they again make a connection between the physical and the psychological, those feelings. We want them to be independent. And the more they practice, the better they're going to be at independently doing it. So lastly, you can guide your children as they problem solve. So your child will encounter problems. They're not going to be perfect at this right at the get-go. but we want to recognize and support their capacity to learn problem-solving skills. We want to say this is something that they can do independently, maybe not right now, but soon, or the more practice they get, they will be able to do it. So this isn't something that we should shield them from. This is something that we should help them practice and help them face head on. And sometimes they're going to need explicit guidance in choosing responses to big emotions. All emotions are acceptable. We don't want to diminish any emotions, especially those negative emotions, which is what we tend to really fixate on. But there are times, of course, where responses to those emotions are just kind of too far. You might be dealing with a situation where a little one, they get so frustrated that they start to hit or kick, and that's very common. And it again does not mean that they're bad or that there's something wrong. It's just in that moment that emotion was so big that it kind of went from my heart and my head and into my fist, right? And so we want to tell them, something like, I understand that you're upset, but hitting is never okay. How can you express your emotions differently next time? Or how can you show that you're upset differently? And you might have to give them some options. Could you tell me that you're upset? Could you make an upset face? Building on those building blocks of being able to express emotions in a more adaptive, more appropriate way, so that when they aren't with you at home, even though we don't want them doing these things at home either, but when they're at school or when they're at a friend's house, when they're at a party or something, we don't want them hitting. We want them being able to recognize their emotions and say, this is how I'm going to express it right now. I'm going to express it in an appropriate way, in a way that helps me and doesn't hurt anyone else around me. And this is another time where you can model those big emotions yourself. When you have a disappointment in your life, when you're angry about something, you can say, this is how I'm feeling right now. I'm really upset with something that someone said to me at work today. And I think I'm just going to take some time to calm down so that I don't feel so upset anymore. And they'll start to notice that when grandma and grandpa or auntie or uncle gets upset, they don't punch anybody. They just kind of take some time. Maybe they go off into the garden and have some quiet time to themselves. And that's a time to model that for your children, to say, these are the things that you can do when you're feeling those big emotions. Children really want autonomy. They want to be independent. And being able to solve their problems independently gives them that chance to be autonomous. So here's a nice acronym that you can use to discuss feelings with your child. It's the ruler approach. And this is used in schools, but it's very easily used in homes as well. So the R stands for recognize. How am I feeling? Noticing the physical sensations that you have in your body. The U is for understand. What made me feel this way? Connecting the physical sensation to an event. Label. What word best describes my current emotion? This is where that emotion vocabulary comes in. When they've built that vocabulary up, they can say, this is how I'm feeling right now in my physical self. This is what made me feel this way. And this is the word that best fits that feeling. So it's a process. Express. How can I best express my emotions in words? In words. Not those externalizing behaviors, those aggressive behaviors, but in words. How can I express my emotions? Well, I'm feeling angry right now. So I'm going to say I'm really angry, and this is what made me angry, and this is why I'm feeling angry. And the regulate. What can I do to keep this emotion or change it? Sometimes we want to keep emotions. Maybe you want to be angry for a little bit, and that's okay. But also you might be feeling happy. Again, it's not only about negative emotions. And I can keep this emotion by, talking to my friend more because they make me really happy when I talk to them. Or I'm feeling angry right now because of a fight that I had with my friend. And I'm going to change this emotion by talking to them about it and saying, this is something that I don't want to have happen. And I apologize. And going forward from there. Or I feel really angry about something else, and I'm just going to take some quiet time to myself to paint, to draw, to read a book, to do something that's going to bring that emotion down. Another thing that you can do to help teach children about emotion is use literacy. So I'm sure that story time is a big part of everyone's kind of repertoire and things that we do each night or each day with our children. And children's literature really offers a low stakes opportunity for children to practice emotional intelligence skills. They do that by kind of looking at the characters in the story and seeing how their emotions match the emotions that they themselves might be feeling on a day-to-day basis. So looking at those illustrations and finding angry faces, finding happy faces, finding disappointed or worried or surprised faces, and looking at the situations that are going on and saying, wow, that's really similar to my own life. And I've felt that way before. And let's see what this character does to deal with that emotion. There's also a large number of books that are written specifically to teach about how emotions are normal. You see there, My Body Sends a Signal. So that's a book specifically meant to teach about how emotions impact our physical selves. Listening to My Body is another example. Tough Guys Have Feelings Too. It's one of my favorites. It teaches about how, specifically for boys and young men, how emotions are normal, and those are things that are just going to come up, and it's normal for boys to have those emotions, which is something that sometimes they're not told. So those are definitely helpful. And building on that a little bit, I included here some read aloud prompts for books that you might read with your children. And I have an excerpt from the book Chrysanthemum here. And Chrysanthemum is not feeling so good because Victoria made fun of her name. And so you might say to your child, like, how is the character feeling? How do you know he or she is feeling that way? In this case, she. Can you show me a sad face? Chrysanthemum is feeling sad. And this follows, you can see, this follows the ruler acronym. So what happened to make the character feel sad? What happens to make you feel sad? You're connecting the story to their emotions. You're giving them a really non-intimidating way to practice that emotional vocabulary and practice expressing themselves. And finally, these are some things that you might see in your child already, or some things that you might want to praise into when you notice them, your child building those things. So they can recognize and verbalize their emotions and others' emotions too. Wow, I'm feeling really sad today, or, my little brother seems to be really upset about this. They practice empathy and they work to understand different perspectives. So they can understand how other people feel or why other people are feeling differently than they are about certain situations. They also work well with other people at school or at home, especially with siblings, right? When they see people are in need, they offer to help, or they might say something like, wow, that person looks like they need some help. They might not be able to help them in the moment, but they're aware of it. You notice that they're employing that kind of empathic thinking. When they feel upset, they can calm themselves down. They have a toolbox of things that they can do to calm themselves down. And they think before they act. They also have a growth mindset. I can't do that yet, but I will be able to do that at some point.
Thank you, Andy. So let's pull all these pieces together and talk about kids and coping, and how do we take the ideas that both Andy and Blanca shared and translate it into practice. There's no rule book for parenting. I'm sure you all know that very well. And so this is not like a perfect how to do this and your kids will automatically know how to regulate their emotions. It's giving you a framework to think about emotional regulation, ideas that hopefully come to mind when your kids are experiencing these big feelings. And then ideally, some tips and techniques you can try at home to see if it works for you and your family. This quote is so similar to what we've heard from both both Blanca and Andy, and it says what we are teaches the child far more than what we say. So we must be what we want our children to become. So we know that we're an important part of this process. And it starts from the time our kids are babies, right? Your baby cries. What do? You pick them up, you put them in your arms, you rock them, they look at your face, they turn to you to learn how to regulate their emotions. And that continues across their life into adulthood when they become adult children. And so because you're such an integral part, it's important that we hold our boundaries and we recognize what it's like for us. It's hard when we're sitting and our kids are experiencing these really big, intense feelings, or they're having a meltdown, or they're in a vulnerable position. That often triggers something within us, and that's okay. And you might be able to dive right in, and you might need a parent timeout. Either one is perfectly fine. When you do need that parent timeout, that's a great model for your kids. You can talk to them calmly, use the techniques Blanca and Andy shared to label the emotions you're experiencing in the moment. Say, mommy is going to go to her room for 5 minutes to practice her deep breathing and then calmly walk away. And do whatever is calming and relaxing for you for those 5 minutes. And importantly, keep it to those 5 minutes. If you say you'll come back in that amount of time, do so. So that way you feel a little bit more recharged and ready. Also, as parents, our first response is often to fix, right? So your kid comes home and they've had a hard day, or they're experiencing what they perceive as unpleasant emotions, and we want to make it better, to take it away. And that makes total sense. A quote that I really like when thinking about how to hold space for these big feelings is by Pamela Children. And she says, compassion is knowing your own darkness well enough you can sit in the darkness with others. Very deep, right? But really what it speaks to is that sometimes, and a lot of times, it's okay to just be. If our kids are experiencing whatever emotion, fill in the blank, we don't have to fix it. We can sit with them, we can experience it with them. And it might be one of the hardest things we do as parents, but it also can be one of the most important things, to really hold that space, to be in that vulnerable position with them. And a technique that I like in those moments is to ask our kids, do you want me to just listen, or do you want advice? And 9 times out of 10, they want to just be heard and to be seen. They're having a hard day and you say, I hear you, I get it. I've also been left out. I've also been chosen last. I've also failed a test. I know it sucks. Sometimes they do want advice, and that's okay too. But giving them that option, if we're not sure, allows them to communicate to us what they might need in that moment. So as I'm listening to Blanca and to Andy and trying to put myself in your shoes, I can imagine it's so much information, and some of it might be totally familiar, things you've heard before, and some of it might not be familiar at all, and that can be overwhelming. And so rather than feeling like, oh my goodness, I need to implement all of these things right away, pick one, start there. Maybe you heard Andy talk about using books and those prompts, and you thought, okay, I can do that. Try that this week. And if it works, awesome, keep doing it and try a new thing and add on to it next week. I really like the idea of crowding out. So we add more things in that are helpful and are healthy and cope, and that eventually crowds out the not so good stuff. And so as I talk about more techniques you might use, again, pick one just this week to try it out. I want to start with this idea of prevention. So the title of the talk, We Can Do Hard Things, was inspired by Glennon Doyle, who's one of my favorite authors and speakers. And she has this quote, feeling all your feelings is hard, but that's what they're there for. Feelings are for feeling, all of them, even the hard ones. And it's so simple, but so profound. Feelings are for feeling. And so if we think about emotion regulation, a huge part of that is literally feeling all the feelings. So not just coping with them, helping to decrease them, but allowing ourselves to sit with them and to know that it's okay. It might feel unpleasant, but eventually those feelings will subside. And so that's one of the things we want to do when we're teaching emotional regulation, is allowing kids to know, and as the others shared, that all feelings are valid. And it's not just about being happy, right? It's about feeling everything, so that we teach our kids not just how to lean into the really wonderful, joyful, positive emotions, but how to manage and hold on to the not so pleasant emotions so that they don't take us down. The idea, I'm skipping over some just in the nature of time, but this idea of prevention is really key, because if I'm let's say, second grader, and I get really anxious before a test, I can learn a relaxation technique and try it for the first time right before my test. And it's going to be a little bit helpful, right? If I learn to deep breathe, let's say, and I practice right before that test, it's going to be way more helpful if I practice relaxation for the 2 months leading up to that test. And now I already know how to do it. I've practiced it. It's become automatic. It's become part of who I am. And so, yes, we want to manage big feelings in the moment, but ideally we're teaching kids when they're not experiencing those big feelings. Sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's really what works best. And so I put this little image here because it's actually a YouTube video, like a countdown. And let's say 15 minutes feels too much, pick 5 minutes every day to practice calming activities. And I'll provide some examples for what that might look like. But again, the goal is for these things to be automatic, so that when we need them, we already know how to use them. So we heard about labeling feelings. I'll just briefly touch upon this one. Something I like is telling kids, use your words. Again, sounds so simple, but we often experience our emotions physiologically, right? So we see the tears, we see the shaking, we see the meltdowns, and we have heard how we can give kids language to talk about what they're experiencing, but they might forget in the moment. We know that when we're in the heat of experiencing very high intense emotions, we're not thinking, right? And so that's where we can come in as parents to prompt them, use your words, tell me what you're experiencing. And that usually works well. We also heard about how to use books, or it can be movies, TV shows, to have kids practice labeling their emotions. And something that was mentioned also is a chart. So having this maybe somewhere in the house or somewhere in the classroom. If you're a teacher, maybe they don't have the words, or they feel so much in the moment they can't speak, but they can point to the emotion that they're feeling. So let's talk about some specific relaxation techniques. There are tons. If you Google like relaxation and coping for kids, you will find so much. But some that I like that are really simple. One is just teaching kids regular deep breathing or belly breathing. That's the image in the middle. And for kids, it can be fun to include a stuffed animal or some type of toy, something they like. You put it on their belly, so that way when they breathe in and out, they kind of watch the stuffed animal go up and down. And that creates a really important feedback system for them. One, they like the stuffed animal or the toy, so that's nice. But the feedback system is key, because if they see it going up and down, that tells them they're engaging in that task. So it's kind of putting them in the moment, they're practicing that mindfulness, and they're really engaging in deep breathing. Something as simple as smelling a flower. You think like, okay, how can that teach relaxation? But if you're smelling a flower, you're breathing in, and then naturally you have to breathe out. And so it gives them something they can imagine, or something they can kind of understand and hold on to practice these skills. I'm going to skip over this one and just show you a screenshot of a relaxation script that I really like. You can find it online. It's something called progressive muscle relaxation for kids. And it's a whole body way of teaching them how to pay attention to the tension they hold on in their body, and then how to release it. So you'll notice in the second little paragraph, they pretend they're a cat, right? You want to stretch your arms out in front of you, raise them high over your head. Very engaging. They can picture the lazy cat, they can act like the lazy cat, and when they walk through all of these different steps, the hands and arms, the shoulders, the neck, the jaw, they're automatically practicing that relaxation. This is the second part of it. This technique is also pretty good in the moment when you're experiencing really intense emotions, and it's a grounding technique, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so you teach kids to name 5 things they can see, 4 things they can feel, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. And what that does is really take them out of their head, right? If you're experiencing emotions, either it feels very intense, or maybe you're anxious about something in the future, or you're feeling upset about something in the past, this brings them to the now. And it makes them connect to what's going on around them to kind of quiet the mind. And that in and of itself can be grounding or relaxing for them. I also love the idea of creating an environment where they can practice. And so we said we want this to become automatic. And so it's great if they have a calming corner, as you can see here, or like a chill out zone in their house somewhere, not a timeout area, a place that's theirs that they can go, ideally every day. Maybe it's part of their nighttime bed routine where they can practice just being calm. And that will look different for each kid. Maybe for them, calm is drawing. Maybe it's listening to music. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's talking to a parent. It doesn't matter so much what it is, as long as it does provide a sense of calm and relaxation. I'm going to skip over these. And we heard a little bit about this before, so I'm going to skip that one too. So let's spend a second talking about play. Play is underrated and so wonderful for kids when we're in this generation of being so scheduled and so productive that we sometimes forget just to have unstructured time where there's no purpose for it, there's no function for it, it's just for us. Play has so many benefits for kids, and a huge part of that is releasing their emotions, releasing their energy, allowing them to be creative, allowing to express themselves, which all comes together to equal emotion regulation. And I love this quote. I love this handle from Instagram, Big Little Feelings. But they posted, "Children don't say, 'I had a hard day, can we talk?' They say, 'Will you come play with me?'" Again, so simple, but so profound. Often when kids need us the most, they will ask to play. They will make a bid for that connection. And we're human too, so we feel the pull, oh my gosh, I have to make dinner, I have to do the laundry, I have to prepare for work tomorrow. And again, it might just be 5 minutes you feel you can devote in that time, but that's something, and that will create that connection and give them the space to release some of their emotions. I included this little screenshot too. They had posted it with that image, and it said not to go to a place of guilt. And it's such a good reminder as we're talking. If you're like, oh my gosh, I can think about the last 10 times my kid said, "Can you play with me?" and I had something else to do. This is about growth and about learning new things and trying new things and not turning to that place of guilt when we recognize, oh, we wish we would have done something different before. So all about that connection seeking. Gratitude is something else that we can teach our children. I'll highlight one gratitude exercise just in the nature of time, since we're running a little bit short. The 3 good things, because it's simple, it doesn't cost a thing. And again, it can be part of that kid's nightly routine or maybe even dinner conversation, where you ask them, what are 3 good things that happened today? Excuse me. And everyone in the household can do the same thing. And again, it sounds so simple, but what it teaches them to do is connect to positives, to orient their mindset to things that went well during the day, and to learn that there are good and there's not so good. Those things coexist. So even in days that are really hard, there's also usually something we can identify that went well. Some sensory techniques can also be helpful. And so sensory techniques allow us to get out a lot of that restless negative energy that makes it harder for us to cope. It could be fun and interactive, like creating a glitter jar with your little ones. It could be, if you're a parent, you've probably seen all these fidget toys and kids love them. And they might look silly, but again, it can be really helpful to release those feelings in the moment as they're practicing using their words. So just some ideas, again, going through it fast in the nature of time. So I know we're at 7:30, so I'll try to wrap up in the next 2 minutes so that we can also have a few moments for questions. So in the moment, your child is having really big feelings and you're overwhelmed and you're thinking, what do I do? I love this statement. As adults, it would be incredibly hurtful to be ignored or worse, sent away during times of distress. So our pull might be, this is too much, this is too hard, this is too overwhelming. And our challenge is to create that space to know, yes, it can be hard and we can do hard things. We can hold that space for our kid. We can hear their difficult feelings. We can help them cope with it. It might not be perfect and it might be messy, but we can work on it together. And again, that's modeling. It's teaching them that you're part of this process too. The feelings are okay, behaviors might not be, and so that's what we're wanting to work on. So they're in the heat of the moment, we get on their level, we kneel down, we make eye contact, we model calmness. Maybe we've already taken a parenting timeout first. We help them label their feelings and we help them use one of the coping they've already been practicing that we've talked about. All of this takes planning, not necessarily like sitting down, like sketching out what you'll do, but thinking through for your kid, what works and what doesn't. So this latter image is to create this analogy that there are some feelings for us, they might be different for each person, that are easier to manage. And there are some that are a lot more difficult to manage. And maybe on the easy days, just looking at my glitter jar is going to work. But at the very top of the ladder, on the really hard days, maybe I need something more. Maybe I need to call a friend. Maybe I need to spend an extra 5 minutes on my calming corner. So we want to think about this ahead of time again, so that we are ready. So final thoughts, we talked about letting go of parenting guilt, really having this growth mindset and making sure that we are comfortable with our boundaries as well. So I'm sorry I kind of sped through some of the last ones, but I wanted to be respectful of people's time. I included my email address on here too. So we'll try to answer a few questions before we end today. But if you want to reach me, and I can pass along information or questions to Blanca and Andy. And then also I'll leave here on the slide some information about our clinic as well. Anthony, do you have thoughts on what the best way to do this?
Sure. So with sharing the information, first off, Dr. Warren, perhaps put it in the chat so we could share that with all our attendees who wanted more information, not only your email, but any other additional helpful links that you may provide. While you're looking for that, Dr. Warren, if I may, and this is to any of our well-esteemed panelists, first off, big applause for this great presentation. This was really, really great. So Dr. Warren, Andrew, Blanca, thank you so much. The question that came through is, this wonderful presentation about children. Anything concerning teenagers though? What would some recommendations, your recommendation would be in regards to teenagers?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind, I was just trying to look at the chat too. I wasn't able to glance at it while we were talking. But with teens, I like the technique of asking them what they need. And so checking with them when they're having that hard day, when they're experiencing something that's really difficult, do they want us to just listen to them or do they want us to help them problem solve? And to not forget, they're kids too, right? They're teens. And so definitely there are nuances and lots of different factors that we must keep in mind when we're teaching them emotional regulation. But at the heart of it, all the same ideas and concepts work and apply to them. And I think too with teens, continuing that connection building, because when they're having hard days, it can be difficult, right? To lean into that and to make sure we're still showing up and we're present. And if they tell us 10 million times, I don't want to talk to you, to show up the next day and still check in and to still be there and to still let them know and send them that message. I love you. I'm here for you. I'm ready to talk when you're ready to talk. to not feel discouraged. I saw another comment about like empathy waning as kids get older. And that's a very real thing. Again, we're human too, right? It can be exhausting to be faced with these challenges over time. And so taking some of these ideas and just day by day showing up, I know I've used that term, but I think it's really all we can expect of ourselves, to show up and be there for our kids and see if we can slowly implement these changes. It won't happen overnight, right?
Great, thank you. And Andrew, Blanca, anything to add? Not to put you on the spot, but
Oh no, yeah, I know there was especially during the book or the literacy section, someone asked any literature suggestions for teens, and I just did like a kind of a brief search of kind of like a emotional intelligence books for teens specifically, and there are quite a few that come up. And one thing that is also kind of helpful is emotion journaling. So maybe for older kids and teens, that might be an interesting kind of angle as well, of having them actually create a journal of their emotions and connect those emotions to a particular event that happened to create that emotion. But other than that, the literature for teens are things like, there's a book, Master Your Emotion, which looks good. There's also books for teens on specific, I guess, mental health concerns like anxiety and depression and things like that that are geared toward teens that can be helpful.
And I saw in the comments too, there's a statement too about manipulation and using emotions as a way to perhaps get something. And I think that's so important to think through, because if we're feeling that our kids are manipulating us, that it's information. What it means will depend on the kid and the situation and what's going on, but I would approach it that way. What are they telling us without telling us? How can we meet those needs in a different way? Maybe they are connection seeking. And again, I use that purposely rather than attention seeking, because that's usually what's happening. They might not say, I need you, but they might feel that deep within inside and then act out a way to get that. And I've also seen several questions about the slides. We can share them with you if you reach out. And I know Anthony said this would be posted as well to Nova's website.
Yeah, definitely. Ms. Horland shared that that website. Thank you so much for doing that, of where the recording will be. And I will work with our panelists to try to share the presentation if my panelists don't mind with our guests, our attendees today. We definitely will look into that as well. The recording will be up, and just give us a little time to get it downloaded, of course, and fix it all up, and it will be posted on that website. Another question came through, and I believe it's another great question. Any recommendations, any literacy you would recommend to parents of the children, particularly that are being counseled or going through this assessment?
Thanks. I saw that one too. So thank you for mentioning it. I would say that really depends on the presenting concern, what the topic is. And so definitely reach out, send me an email, and maybe share a little bit more information, and I can share with you based on that what some helpful literature might be.
Great, thank you. All righty. Any final comments from any of our 4 panelists?
Thank you all for attending. Hopefully you can take one piece away with you. And thank you to Blanca and to Andy, and for Councilmember Horland too.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman Horland, for joining us this evening, and very appreciate your support with our endeavors. So thank you very much. And then, of course, to Andrew and Blanca, all the best in your studies and your continuation. This goes to show what NSU assists our students, delivers. The NSU Edge is right here at work, and you see that in Andrew and Blanca, so thank you very much. And of course, all this could not happen without Dr. Shannon Warden. Thank you so much for your assistance, your guidance, and of course, your leadership. So much appreciation to you very much. And to our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and stop the recording. We definitely wish